Pride London Network. Once again, my name is Stephen Demellier, President of Pride London Festival. And I want to thank you once again for taking part and enjoying all of the festival and all the programming that we've had to offer throughout July and throughout the year. I also want to take some time and thank each and every one of our sponsors and contributors to Pride London Festival over this year. As we continue on through a challenging year, we want to make sure that we recognize everybody that is a part of Pride. And part of that is exactly what we're here to do today. As we had mentioned, we were very, very excited to present something new and something that I think is a little overdue. And that is talking with some of the former vice presidents and leaders of not just Pride, but of Halo and our movement in London, Ontario. And so today, I'd like to take a moment and introduce one of those leaders, one of those pillars of our community. Please help me welcome Richard Huddler. Hi, Richard. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing fine today. Thank you. And thanks for the introduction.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And as I mentioned, legacy interviews are something that we wanted to take a moment and highlight the history and your own experience working within the community and within various organizations. So thank you so much for, of course, your time and your knowledge that you're going to be sharing with our audience and our community today. And Mr. Huddler, what role did you hold while being involved in the community through Halo with the organization?
Well, I was president. I was a volunteer at Halo for about 20 years, and I was president for 14 of those years. Yeah.
And when was that? What time? Do you remember what time frame that had happened?
Well, I first moved to London in '76, and that's the first time I went to Halo. I became involved on the Social Services Committee in '78, and I was president from in '81. I was on the executive, I think, from '80, and I was president from '81 to '95, and then I still volunteered until I left London in 2001.
So that's quite some time that you were heavily involved in not just Halo as an organization, but within the community directly and having such an impact. I'm very curious. What are you doing now as we talk?
Well, I was a social worker. I'm retired from social work, but I'm still involved in a group called Queer Ontario. Uh, it's an Ontario group, but it's located here in Toronto, and I'm very involved with that. This is our logo.
Very nice. You said it was Queer Ontario. They have a website. Is that correct?
Yeah, the website is queerontario.org.
Perfect. So you had a chance to not only, of course, get involved in our local city, but of course in the areas that you've also moved to as well. So again, queerontario.org is the site,
Yes.
and it's a non-for-profit organization.
Oh yeah.
So that's fantastic. So you've never given up. You've continued to work within the community and trying to represent appropriately. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say. It was interesting that in 1978, when I went to Halo and said I wanted to be involved on the Social Services Committee, the first job they gave me was to be a representative to the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Ontario, which Halo was one of the founding members of that. And that's the parent group of this Queer Ontario that I'm involved with now. So I was involved with the two of them all those years.
Wow. Now, just for a little bit of context, for individuals who may not be aware of Halo's history or its origins, or even for those who may have forgotten, would you mind just kind of explaining a little bit about, as you mentioned, the kind of the start of Halo and why it was important at the time?
Yeah, well, Halo's, I don't know, I wrote an article about this in 2005, but it was really after the Stonewall riots in New York in 1969 that I think or there were organizations before that, but that's when they really got started, especially at the universities. And that was true at the University of Western Ontario uh, as well. And their group was called the University of Western Ontario Homophile Association. And that was started by a lot of people that were involved in the gay community in London. And it was making money, but the money was all going to they have dances and parties, and they were making money, but they all went to the student union. So they decided to break off and set up their own establishment, which is what became Halo. They rented a building and they moved into that in 1974. And so that was the beginning of the Homophile Association of London, Ontario. And that was like a community organization. And it had a bar, supported by its own bar. So it was self supporting.
That's amazing. So, again, just for a bit of context and reference, this is before, the ability for you to go out and as we are now, be living proud and out and, we're here, we're queer and get used to it kind of idea. This was the start of that. And this was, as you said, giving the ability for a community to have a safe space to congregate, to gather, to talk, to educate, and to enjoy one another at the same
Yeah.
time. And as you were mentioning, have a little bit of self-sustainability when it comes to the economic side and trying to ensure that things continue.
Hmm.
So that's fantastic. And as you mentioned, there is a history. There's an article that you've actually written that we will link to as well. And there's a website as well that goes through the history of Halo and the building, and we'll link to that as well, so people have a better understanding
Yeah.
of that history and through Western University. Coming back to kind of the differences between when this fight really started and the movement really started to today. Um, I'm curious what you've noticed within the LGBTQ plus community and where you see some of the differences from then to today, and how do you feel about some of those differences within the community?
Well, as you said, when those were started, one of the first things that the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Ontario worked on was getting sexual orientation included in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And that didn't happen until 1986. So all those years in the 70s, we weren't even included in the Human Rights Code. So people could be fired, they could lose their jobs, and they could be, kicked out of schools and kicked out of their apartments. I mean, it was quite horrible up until then. But even after that, there were still problems. And I mean, we had problems even at Halo, even in the 90s when the mayor refused to give us a proclamation, and we filed a human rights complaint against her. So it's been an ongoing thing, but that's how it's changed. It's progressed, and we were able to buy the building. But one of the things that we did was that the building started out. We had to board up all the windows because the people that knew about it were they would break the windows, and we had to change. We couldn't enter right from the front because it was right on the street, and if people had to line up to get in because there was a limit on how many people we could have there, and we got crowds. Um, the people on the street were being harassed by people driving by in cars and such. So we moved the entrance over to the parking lot. But I mean, there were things like that were happening, and a lot of that stuff is not nearly as bad now that we've got the rights, and there's a lot of those changes. And now, with the human rights, we've even extended to the point where people can marry, and so it's been a huge change over the years, but it took a lot of work by a lot of groups and a lot of different groups too, not just us.
And as you're first of all, that's it's extremely fascinating to understand, as you said, not just some of the issues and the challenges that you faced prior to gaining recognition and just basic human rights and understanding, but even after that, the fight that continued to happen and the recognition and the feeling of being safe. I moved to the city in 2001, and one of my very first experiences was seeing a club called H2O, and it reminds me
Well, what?
Club H2O, and it was on Dundas Street, and it reminded me when you speak of um, exit or entering the building from the back or from the side, they had that same similar concern, and that was in 2001. So as
Uh,
you said, things do take some time, and it's that work and dedication of not just one person, as you mentioned, but a number of organizations, a number of
yeah.
people that take over the years. Um, you
Hmm.
know, as we speak about that work and about that involvement that goes, a number of years, a number of people, I'm curious. Prior to your continued involvement with Halo and within Queer Ontario, uh, were there any other organizations or any other groups or even people that kind of gave you the influence to get involved, or that you saw doing work and said, I want to continue to do that, or I want to get involved in that? Were there any organizations or people that kind of spurred your interest in this?
Well, I was from Chicago, and I was out, in Chicago, and the gay bars there were mostly owned by the syndicate, so the money always went to the syndicate. And I always thought, well, it's too bad we don't have one of our own that's self-supporting. And I didn't know Halo already existed when I moved to London, but I didn't. I knew about it, but I didn't know much about it. But I was so glad to see that that existed as an independent organization, and that it was great that the university was good in helping getting it started too. But while we were there, but having the building and everything, we were able to help a lot of other groups get started. The NCC actually first formed there. They formed, independent of Halo, but they were able to use the building and such to get started. And Gay AA was there, and there were a lot of other groups of youth. So we had youth groups, and I don't know. I was trying to remember some of them. The P-Flag formed there, and there was groups for trans people. Some tried to start forming there, and then they would go off and be independent. But there was a lot of different groups involved and people involved. Certainly, the church was very involved. The MCC. Yeah.
That's first of all, that's very interesting to learn that a lot of the organizations that continue to see strength today and support today had their start within our community, had their start closely tied. And as you said, some of them went off and did their
Yeah.
own independent things.
Oh,
But
yeah. That was fine. Yeah.
that's amazing. And you know, as we talk about some of those things that Halo had done, when you were involved in the organization at the higher level in the president's position and taking on various roles, what were some of the more unexpected challenges and surprises that you came across at that time?
Well, there were a couple. One was the whole Project Guardian thing that when the police started arresting gay men that they were saying were molesting young people, but it was, it really wasn't that at all. It was really an attack on the gay community, and that was quite frightening to a lot of the gay men. And plus, all the times that police were arresting people in parks and stuff, that went on for years. And we had to fight some pretty, very difficult battles around that. And then the whole thing with the proclamation. I mean, that was a surprise because same thing had happened in Hamilton just the year before, and they had filed a complaint and had won. So we didn't anticipate any trouble, but the mayor here still went ahead and he refused our proclamation. So we had to go through the whole process again, but we were successful and were able to get the proclamation and the flag flown. But she even said that, once that flag was flown, there wouldn't be any others. But later on, they did start flying it again, and even the mayor a couple of years ago invited me back to apologize for some of that stuff. So things have been changing over the times, and I think you just have to keep plugging away. You may get the laws in there, but if you don't make sure that they're enforced and don't fight to, you have to keep up the fight and still do.
It's really interesting that you mention, first of all, that you have to keep that fight up, and that it doesn't end even when you hit that victory of something. There's still more work that needs to be done, and as you mentioned, from the fight with Diane Haskett, the former mayor, to all the way to a couple of years ago, I believe it was Matt Brown, that
Yeah,
generated an apology.
yeah,
Uh, so it's as you said, it sometimes it takes a long time to get to that final destination, at least for that situation, but it takes that work, and so it's really interesting to hear that you were getting pushback not only from some corners you expected, but also some corners you didn't expect, and had to challenge that and move forward from there. Um, and as we stand today, we're in a different position, as you were mentioning, right? We have a city that is much more welcoming and much more open to that. As we talk about some of the big and small surprises and some of the things that kind of were challenges and things that you were not expecting, I'm wondering, was there anything that, or what were the things that were really proud moments for you, moments that really stood out to you that you walked away from and said, "I'm really glad that I was involved in that," or "I'm really glad that that was, a project of mine." Were there any moments like that stood out to you over the years?
oh yeah, there were many. When we got the legislation finally in '86, because I was working with Cielgo that had really focused on that, and we worked on it at Halo too. That was really very encouraging, and we tried numerous times before. They tried 4 times. They'd worked on it for 12 years before they finally succeeded, and, and so that was really a great moment. And then when we had the whole proclamation issue, that's when we started to have pride and pride events outside Halo. And of course, there was so much conflict then between the. We were getting a lot of pushback from the city and everything, and from the community. But the way people really supported us and came out, and we had the march, and we had great turnouts at parade. I remember I was really worried one day when we were using the parking lot for the event, for the Pride event, and I thought, will anybody come? And a friend of mine, and I was in the building, wasn't paying attention. My friend of mine who was with me, but had been outside, he took me to the door and showed me the huge crowd outside. And that made me feel so great. I was just so glad to see that. You know, and so
So
the support that we got from the people, you know, but of course we got pushback too, even from within community. I mean, excuse me, and I mean that's even today because Queer Ontario kind of formed as a group because, yeah, we're kind of pushed back between gay liberation and assimilation, and we focus on the liberation aspect. The people who want to assimilate didn't like a lot of our activism. They would say we're causing the problems. We're not. We're not stopping them. But I mean, you had to cause them in order to stop them, you know.
Right.
And so that, I mean, I think goes on even today. And a lot of people who really want to assimilate now don't like a lot of the activism that's still going on.
As you were mentioning, the almost like the intrinsic fight between our community and how progress looks to different people and how they achieve those steps of getting to that place that we all want to be at. Um, there's a few things that stand out to me with what you've just indicated, which is, that the idea of liberation and aside from trying to be accepted versus trying to assimilate,
Yeah.
um, and that's it's very interesting that, as I said, that's always been an interesting dichotomy that the organizations have had to deal with. Um, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm curious, when we talk about pride as a movement, and the difference between Halo and what's happened with Halo and where Pride is today. I'm curious, when you were involved with the organization with Halo and you saw other cities and other areas popping up with other organizations, as you were mentioning, that come up and are trying to maybe fill a void or trying to do a certain thing in a different way. What was your thought as you're seeing these other institutions and other organizations pop up and look to fill that space that may even be a space that Halo was in? Um, was it one of joy and happiness that you're seeing this, or
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we tried to support them. That was a whole part of CLGRO, the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights. And these kinds of organizations popped up all over the province, uh, in the cities and to varying degrees of success. But I think Halo was always the most successful, and they would come and go, especially for university, because you might have an active group that's there then, but then when they graduate and they move on, then the next group doesn't necessarily pick up. So it was really good that Halo was independent kind of the university, and their groups are, I think, still going on at the university. They come and go, but and I thought Halo was going to be there forever. I was really quite disappointed when Halo kind of folded. But I think it's part of the assimilation liberation conflict that people wanting to assimilate. The need for Halo, maybe it wasn't as much there, but I think it's still there because you see the whole Black Lives Matter thing, and it's there. And what Queer Ontario focuses on mostly is that's why we like the term queer, because it isn't just gay and lesbian. Anyone who's somehow different, a lot of people are still discriminated against, and not you know and we're saying that they shouldn't have to be assimilated, that they should be recognized as they are, and same with queer people, that we should have our space. We don't have to be part of the general scheme of things. We weren't even that happy about getting marriage. Actually, we spoke against it at CL Grove because we felt it was a privileged institution that gave advantages to some people over others, and that other kinds of relationships should have equal status.
and as you're saying, so the idea is that it goes to this idea of liberation versus assimilation, this idea
Yeah,
that again, there is a path that somebody may see, but a different way of getting to it. As we talk about, as you were mentioning, where Pride has kind of taken this movement as an organization, as well as, frankly, how a lot of individuals within our community are comfortable and would like to see more of that assimilation or corporatism, as some people have seen it.
Yeah,
Whereas some people, as you're saying, do not want to see any of that and are pushing against that.
yeah.
Um, I'm curious, from your perspective, um, what would you like to see this organization or organizations, Pride London, Pride London, do over the next 5 to 10 years? How do you see the future of these types of organizations for something that you would like to kind of envision? How do you envision that?
Well, we're very concerned about the corporatization too, because it's, once you start getting money from groups like that, they try to control you and they try to assimilate you, and so we've always kind of felt that gay liberation was more. It should, we shouldn't be depending on finances even from the city and such. And that's why I really liked Halo when it started. I mean, it supported itself because it had the barn, but we had a lot of competition. A lot of other bars started up and didn't like us being there. tried to tried to close us down. I don't know if eventually they succeeded. I'm not sure, but the we were making sure that the money was going back into the community. And when there's money around, people seem to want it to go into their pockets rather than into community. So I don't know. It's a difficult battle to fight.
It sounds though like you were saying like there's maybe an understanding that needs to be generated of, as you said, if we are going to, if an organization like Pride is going to be receiving money from a bank or from an organization that traditionally isn't giving on a regular basis, um, maybe there does need to be more of a clarification as to what that money should be going towards and how it's utilized for the community. And as you said, whether or not there is a request for assimilation, or living as a lot of youth state today, living as your true authentic self. Um, so it's interesting that you mentioned that it is a hard question to kind of clarify because the community itself has difference of opinions on this. I am curious. Lastly,
Mhm.
for somebody who is interested in getting involved in non-for-profit organizations like Queer Ontario, organizations like Prides, what would be your suggestion or your advice for someone who is either just coming out or young, or even someone who's a little older who would like to participate in and get involved? What would be your advice to someone like that?
I think it's great, to volunteer for the groups. And I know Halo operated mostly on volunteer staff. We had some paid staff, but it was mostly volunteer. And but I think the thing that's really important is, when people see there is money around, money to be made, they might volunteer because they want to make the money more than serve the community. And that's why I think that that's something to be careful about. And even with taking the money from the corporations, like we kind of say in Toronto here, maybe we don't have the money for the big fancy parades, but we should still have marches and do things that don't bring in that much money, but don't cost that much money. That's more supporting the community rather than looking at making lots of money because money can be kind of evil.
I definitely agree with that. It's a chasing a game that definitely can have some problems. So as you were saying, being involved on a volunteer basis is highly important, and being involved in these types of organizations, whether it's Queer Ontario or other organizations that are similar, it's appropriate. But there is a cautionary tale of being, aware of the situation that's being presented to you, whether it's funds that are being made available or contacts that are being made available to you. So I certainly understand that, and I think our entire community is certainly having this discussion as we talk about it today, as to where Pride is, not just here in London, but obviously in other cities, where it stands as an organization and what it stands for, and how that is represented to the rest of the community and the rest of the general public. So I must say, this has been informative. I really do feel that, you know, our community, if we can, should try to take as much time to learn about the history of our city and our movement here. I think a lot of people get lost sometimes
Oh,
on,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think people sometimes do get lost on Stonewall, or in Toronto's bathhouse raids. But
Mhm.
we do have our own history here. The article that you had mentioned, we're going to post that on the Pride London Network website. So that way, so people have a chance to read a little bit more as well. But this has been very informative, and I am so very thankful that you've taken the time today to talk with me. And I hope that we can connect again, maybe in person. As
Sure, that'd be
you know,
nice. Well, I like to come to Pride in London. I will as soon as I can.
yes, and well, you know what, and
Always enjoy being there. I really do. And I enjoy, watching the parade and talking to people, seeing people that I've known over the years.
well, Mr. Huddler, this has been again my absolute pleasure and honor to be able to chat with you, to be
Well,
able to talk with you a little bit, and
I'm glad that you did it because I know history can change. It's hard to make sure that as it's interpreted over time. So it is good. I'm glad that you want to connect with the people from the past and try to preserve that. Yeah.
well, absolutely. And to anybody watching, as I mentioned, the past dictates where we are.
Yeah.
So it's important that you learn about that history.
Well,
And
it repeats itself too. So
exactly. Well, again, Mr. Huddler, this has been an absolute pleasure. I do want to thank
thank
you
you.
on behalf of the entire Pride
Thank you
London.
for inviting me.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Yeah.
And again, to everyone watching at home, please take some time. Click on the article when we have it posted here for you. Reach out to Queer Ontario. I'm sure they will be more than happy.
Yeah, well, we very much like that. Yes.
Yes, queerontario.org.
FairOntario.org. Yeah.
Absolutely. So once again, Mr. Richard Huddler, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with us. And please enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe and stay
It's my
healthy.
pleasure.
Thank you.
The Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario is a centralized hub for same-gender loving men of African diaspora, Afro-Latino, Caribbean, and Black identities. Our goal is to provide cultural, intergenerational mentorship opportunities, leadership, self-development, and empowerment, as well as activism support aimed at improving the lives of Black queer people in Ontario. Our key areas of focus are culture and knowledge production, sexual health and pleasure, substance use, and mentoring. Please go to our website for up-to-date content, blogs, newsletters, features and profiles of community members, newsletter information, gallery photos, as well as videos and images of our past and upcoming events. You can follow our social media at BGMN Ontario. We hope for your support, and we are thankful for the support of our allies and community organizations.